Nice Things by Sean Robertson. Jack had always enjoyed his job at the Cineplex Odeon Theater. He'd been working there for 7 years now, and in the summer of his 3rd year he'd become the manager. He liked the fact that the theater seemed to make people happy. Most of the crowds that came in on his shift were young people. Sometimes they were on dates. It seemed that most of the kids liked and respected Jack. Jack liked that the theater was a place where people could go to enjoy each other's company. At the theater, Jack was around smiling faces all day. Today the district manager was visiting. Tom Dawson liked Jack a lot. Jack kept the theater clean, he maintained a good relationship with his employees, and he personally greeted the guests at the door. In fact, Tom couldn't think of a more positive person than the manager of this particular theater. "Have you got anything fun planned for the weekend, Mr. Dawson?" asked Jack. "Nothing yet, but I'm sure my wife has got some fun yard work for me." Tom let out a laugh and jabbed at Jack playfully with his elbow. "What about you?" "Oh, I haven't got anything planned either," said Jack. "I'm just looking forward to spending some time with my family. I heard it's going to be really nice this weekend." The two men looked outwards through the large windows of the theater's front door entrance and over the parking lot. There was a beautiful sunset that had been slowly filling the skyline with rich and vibrant color. Bright reds, yellows, and orange hues spilled over the horizon and filled the theater's parking lot with a soft and magnificent glow. He smiled and looked back at the forms he was filling out. Almost time to get off, he thought. Almost time to go see Wendy. Jack handed the filled-out forms to Mr. Dawson when he was finished and shook his hand. "Well, if there isn't anything else, Mr. Dawson, I think I'm about ready to start my weekend," said Jack. "I think that would be just fine, Jack. I'll go over the films for next week with the night manager a bit later. Have a good weekend and say hello to the missus for me." "I'll do that," Jack smiled. "See you." Jack flipped on the radio as he merged onto the highway. The Beatles were singing "Good Day, Sunshine," and Jack chuckled at the subtle irony he saw in the situation. It really had been a good day so far. Come to think of it, his whole life had been pretty darn good. He had a great job, a beautiful, loving wife. He had a model car collection that he'd been working on for over 10 years. His son. Jack loved his son. More than anything, Jack knew that he had truly been blessed when his wife gave birth to little Danny 4 years ago. "I should get Danny a bike for his birthday," Jack said aloud. He grinned. That kid. Jack eased the sedan into the driveway of his 3-bedroom home on Parkside Lane. It wasn't a huge house, but Jack thought it was perfect. You get lonely in big houses, Jack thought absently. He unlocked the front door and quietly stepped inside. As he entered the living room, he looked around for his family. It's quiet, Jack thought. Danny must be asleep. He crept across the living room towards the kitchen where he assumed he'd find his wife. He lifted his hands in front of him to help balance as he began to walk tiptoe across the length of the carpeted floor. His posture resembled a crude imitation of a cartoon animal sneaking past a vicious sleeping dog. He was right. Wendy was in the kitchen. She was facing away from him, looking down at something on the counter. As Jack slowly closed the distance between himself and his wife, his hands reached out like claws. Suddenly, Jack clutched his wife's waist, and she screamed. Wendy whirled around and squirmed in Jack's tickling grasp. "Oh, you shit!" Wendy cried. Wendy hadn't been scared like that in some time. Jack laughed as his fingers wriggled violently on Wendy's midsection. "Good to see you, honey. How was your day?" Jack asked as he continued to tickle his wife. "Jack! Stop!" Wendy half wailed, half laughed. "You're mine now!" Jack cackled wildly. Just then, Danny walked into the kitchen. A blue plush teddy bear hung limply from his right hand. He looked up at his parents with some disinterest. His eyes were puffy from just waking up from a nap. "When's dinner, Mom? I'm hungry." Jack looked at his son. Probably finished dreaming about cars or that show on dinosaurs that he watched last night, Jack thought as he continued to work his fingers into his wife's sides. "Jack! No, Jack! Please!" Wendy cried again. Jack looked into his wife's eyes. Her face had grown red in the few short seconds that had passed since he first startled her. He found an expression of joy mixed with agony there. "Okay," he thought. Jack turned his head again to face his son. A maniacal grin spread across his mouth and his bushy eyebrows raised to form hooks. "Oh, Danny." Jack let go of his wife and started towards his son, his hands strained into talons that reached forward. Danny's face twisted up in an expression of horror. "I'm going to get you," Jack growled. Danny screamed and turned to run, but tripped over his teddy bear. Before he hit the floor, his father grabbed him and swooped him up into the air. Danny laughed wildly, and his father snarled as he lifted his son above his head. "All right, boys," Wendy said as she tried to regain her composure. "That's just about enough." And she had had enough. It had been a long day already, and she was looking forward to relaxing with her husband tonight. Jack let his son down and patted him on the shoulder. He too had had just about enough. Jack moved closer to his wife and put his arms around her neck. "Missed you today." "I missed you too, dear," said Wendy. "I love you." Jack embraced his wife, and they both smiled happily. "I love you too."